Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for this, the second event of VIU's Arts and Humanities Colloquium Series for Spring 2017. My name is Dr. Tim Lewis. I'm currently chair of the VIU History Department, and I'll be acting as your moderator for today's session. While you're settling in, please keep in mind that we are meeting this morning on the traditional territory of the Sunemo First Nation, a fact that we should always have deep appreciation for and sincere respect. And there is one more thing I need to add, a thing that makes me very, very glad. For you see, we would not be here today if it weren't for Dr. Ross McKay. Now, who is he, your question may well be? Well, dear friends, he is the Dean of Arts and Humanities, and all the colloquium's bills he doth pay. So I've really nothing else to say other than hooray for Dr. Ross McKay. Thank you. Look out, Bob Dylan. I've got my eye on your Nobel Prize. And I, sir, know how to enunciate. So, anyway. Now, on to the much more serious business. Not that Ross is not serious, I don't want to get in trouble there. Anyway, this morning is in many ways a celebration of highly accomplished and truly admirable women. The primary topic of discussion is, of course, the life and work of Cobble Hill's Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey, whose diligent work ensured that the thalidomide crisis did not scar countless more lives. I will shortly be calling on Dr. Helen Brown, a retired colleague of mine from VIU's Department of History, who will be introducing today's featured speaker, Dr. Cheryl Walsh, a current colleague of mine in the History Department. As I'm sure Helen will note, Cheryl is a highly accomplished and most admirable woman in her own right. A gifted teacher and an internationally acclaimed scholar, Cheryl is a tremendous asset to our department and VIU as an institution. But before Helen shines some more well-deserved light on Cheryl and her work, I want to take this opportunity to shine a public light on the third admirable and accomplished woman of the morning, Dr. Helen Brown herself. Helen was not only one of the two key founding members of VIU's Department of History, along with the late Dr. Clarence Carr, she is also largely responsible for all of us being here this morning. For it was Helen, working hand in hand with VIU English professor Dr. Katarina Rout, who gave birth to the Colloquium Series, an event that has now become a flagship for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities and VIU as a whole. And I especially might not be here were it not for Helen. In my second year at VIU, a serious budget crunch arose, and my position as a recent hire was anything but secure until Helen announced her retirement, quite likely a few years before she had originally planned to do so. And that is the Helen Brown all of us at VIU came to know, love, and respect. She was a caring and thought-provoking teacher, a tremendously supportive colleague, and a truly decent human being. Please give a warm welcome to VIU Academic Emeritus, Dr. Helen Brown, as she comes to introduce our speaker for the morning.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our speaker, Dr. Cheryl Walsh. Let me begin by telling you something about her. She was born and grew up in Montreal. She did her BA and MA at Western and her PhD at Queen's. She taught history at the University of New Brunswick and the University of Ottawa. Following this, she was a Hanna History of Medicine Scholar and Fellow, as well as a Fulbright Fellow at Duke University in North Carolina. For more than 20 years, she's been a member of the History Department here at VIU, where she teaches in 4 areas: women's history, family history, the history of healthcare, and the history of popular culture. Dr. Walsh has published numerous books on historical aspects of psychiatry, alcohol and drug use, consumerism, children's health, and gender issues in healthcare. Two recent books are Prescribed Norms, Women in Health in Canada and the United States since 1800, and Gender, Health, and Popular Culture, Historical Perspectives. As well as her work as a teacher and author, she was for many years editor of the leading journal in the history of medicine, and she's now executive director of the Western Association of Women Historians. Currently, she's involved in two research projects. One is an examination of the marketing of risky products to children in the last century. It's a joint project with Dr. Catherine Rollwagon, who, as many of you know, is the chair of the Colloquium Committee. Dr. Walsh's second ongoing research project is the authorized biography of Dr. Kelsey. If I might, I would like to take a moment to establish a context for today's presentation, a context that focuses on those of you who are here today. A recent issue of the magazine University Affairs includes an article on a conference at Carleton University, attended by, and I'll just quote here, students, faculty, and administrators who came in droves from across the country, from the vast majority of Canadian universities with PhD programs in the humanities. The article goes on to note that the first concern of the conference was to ask, how can we more effectively convey a sense of the public value of the humanities? It gave me pause to read that because, of course, here at VIU, we're a long way down that road already. The Arts and Humanities Colloquium is a public event, and as such has been modeling the public value of the humanities for over a decade. Evidenced by your turnout today, that is something you think is important. There's a further dimension to the way things work here that is also worth emphasizing. Communication is never a one-way street. Dr. Walsh will share the results of her research on Dr. Kelsey with you, but your response to her work, whether by being here, through your questions and comments in the open session that follows, or by speaking with her afterwards, is part of a circular flow of ideas that she will take away and think about as she continues to write this biography. The fact is, we're engaged in a mutually enlightening process, and that, put simply, is the public value of the arts and humanities. A second context I want to take note of relates to Cheryl. I've told you something of her education, her teaching, and her publications. But what do her accomplishments mean? They mean that she spent her professional life acquiring a specialized expertise in the theories and methodologies of understanding the past. She's learned how to organize large research projects based on extensive bodies of evidence. And importantly, she's learned how to develop a reasoned, sophisticated analysis of complex events. And she has done these things with a degree of success that makes her one of Canada's prominent historians. And when I say she's dealing with complex events, complex issues, you have only to look at the title of her talk, and you will see embedded in it several, but at least two that are of particular interest to me, issues that fill our news every single day, this week, last week, the week before. And perhaps we can talk about that afterwards. So without further ado, Dr. Walsh's presentation today is titled Frances Oldham Kelsey, Thalidomide and the Quest for Good Science in the Nuclear Age. You will find it deeply moving, thought-provoking, and although we might wish that it were not so, you will find it timely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen, Tim, for his poetry. Thank you to all of my colleagues, and especially those, Catherine and Sasha, and those on the Arts and Humanities Colloquium that have taken such good care of me for this. I especially want to thank Dr. Frances Kelsey and her daughters, Christine and Susan, who really took me in when they figured out why some strange random person from Vancouver Island wanted to do their family history, and that's how they look at it. Before I get into the paper, I just want to give you a little background on how I met Dr. Kelsey. I wrote a book on women's health, and as I was doing the research, I found out that there was, when I read about birth defects, that there was a person who had been involved in thalidomide work who was from Cobble Hill, and I thought, my Cobble Hill? And I looked her up, and I found out she was still alive, and she lived in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And I got in touch with the family, and I found out that all of her papers were at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. I've taken 4 trips to the Library of Congress. Now I've had 4 research assistants there work on the papers. Dr. Kelsey worked for the Library of Congress until she was 90 years old, for the FDA till she was 90 years old. She was a pack rat. She kept every report card from elementary school, everything. Everything was given to the Library of Congress, which is a real embarrassment of riches for historians. And so I've been scanning all of that material, uploading it, bringing it back here, printing it out, and hopefully we'll have time to write an actual biography from all of this. More importantly, on my second trip, I made my way to Chevy Chase, and I tried to meet Dr. Kelsey, and she was a very aged woman by then, obviously. And she had an African-American caregiver with a very thick Southern accent. And I came to the door, and I said, "Can I see Dr. Kelsey?" And she said, "I'm sorry, honey, you can't see her. Her daughters aren't here." And I said, "But I brought chocolate." And she said, I'm very sorry, but will you take the chocolate?" "Yes, we'll take the chocolate." So I made my first offering to her, and I showed up again 6 months later with a proper invitation, and the daughters were there. And I sat down with her, and Dr. Kelsey couldn't really hear anymore, so you needed a microphone and headphones, and that's how you talked and had an interview. And I had a Mac there that I just left on as a tape. And I figured she had had many interviews over the years, and she was a little guarded, and I thought, well, how do I kind of break through so she can relax with me? And I saw that she had this cat, a really mangy, scrawny, ugly cat. And I thought, that is a cat that a person loves. So when she turned her head, I went, and I got the cat to jump on my lap. And she turned around and said, "Boy, that cat likes you." And that was it. So we had the interview, and I had this mangy cat on my lap the whole time, and everything was good. And since then, I visited her daughters a couple times as well, and I'm still in contact with them. There's still some papers left that they have since she passed away, and they sold the house. But they said, "We have more papers." And I thought, "Oh, please don't bring any more papers." And she said, "They're going to the Library of Congress, but we saved all the juicy bits for you, Cheryl, because we know what you want," which I thought was very nice. So I have one more trip to go to the daughters. Anyway, let me talk about what I found. In the early 1960s, thalidomide epitomized bad science. Along with the horrific revelations of human experimentation in Nazi death camps at the Nuremberg trials and the ongoing existential threat of nuclear proliferation and radioactive fallout from atom bomb tests, the little pink tranquilizer from a West German pharmaceutical company confirmed for many Americans that unchecked, unregulated science was a menace to their individual families as well as to the planet itself. The nuclear threat was not overcome. The execution of a few Nazi leaders did not mitigate the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet the fight against thalidomide had a heroine, whom her employer, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the American government, and the American public were quick to identify as an exemplar of good science. Thalidomide was developed by the Grunenthal Company in 1953. It was introduced to the West German market in 1957 as a sleeping pill, and it was very popular for both children and adults. It apparently was so innocuous, it was sold without a prescription. Thalidomide also prevented nausea and pregnancy, so many women with severe morning sickness took the drug. On September 12, 1960, thalidomide's American distributor, William S. Merrill Company, applied to the FDA to approve the drug for the U.S. market. Because Merrill included glowing reports about the drug's use in Europe, it was considered to be a routine new drug application. So the FDA assigned the file to its newest medical officer, Dr. Francis Oldham Kelsey. Dr. Kelsey, who was born in 1914 in Cobble Hill, was from a rural yet privileged background. Her father was a retired British naval officer, and her mother's family were wealthy, well-educated Scottish gentry. Frances, or Frankie, enrolled at age 15 in the science program at Victoria College, as UVic then was, which was a feeder school for McGill University. She went after 2 years to McGill. In 1935, she graduated with a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science, and she applied to the University of Chicago to do her PhD in the new field of pharmacology. She applied to a gentleman by the name of Dr. E.M. Geiling, who was one of the first pharmacologists. When she got her acceptance letter, it was written to Mr. Francis Kelsey. And so she asked her supervisor, should I tell him that I'm a woman? And the supervisor said, well, just accept it, and then when you get there, he'll find out. And it worked quite well. She also met her future husband and collaborator, the man in the front, fellow pharmacologist Fremont Ellis Kelsey. Now, the University of Chicago was a very interesting place in the 1940s. During the war, it was one of the places where the Manhattan Project was doing their initial testing. And in fact, and because she was in the science faculty, she knew what was going on in the next building. And in fact, one of the first prototypes of the nuclear bomb was tested under the tennis court of the University of Chicago. Obviously, this was not in papers, but if you do, during the war, if you look in newspapers, they will talk about a minor earthquake that took place in Chicago mysteriously that day. While in the 1940s there, they were informed that at the University of Chicago, married couples could not be employed. So they flipped a coin, and as she said, I lost, and she entered medical school, which she graduated in 1950. She worked as an editorial assistant for the Journal of the American Medical Association, and when Ellis got a job at the University of South Dakota, they moved to the small city of Vermilion, where she worked as a locum practitioner. She taught a little bit at the university, and she raised 2 young daughters. In 1960, the two of them were ready to leave North Dakota, and through the recommendations of their mentor, Dr. Geiling, the 2 Kelseys were hired in Washington. Francis at the FDA's Bureau of Medicine, and Ellis at the National Institute of Health. Dr. Kelsey was part of the new wave of highly educated, specialized government employees, and her team at the FDA included other chemists and pharmacologists. Now, this is important to realize. What I learned from the FDA was that there were so few actual scientists working there in 1960 that when they had the original birth control pill, contraceptive, come to the FDA, they picked a woman who worked there and said, maybe you should go get a master's degree in chemistry so we can test it. That's just the level they were doing. So when Dr. Kelsey was coming, they were already bringing in some highly qualified, properly qualified people. Her team meticulously vetted Merrill's new drug application, and they found serious deficiencies in the data. Dr. Kelsey asked for more testing. The Merrill representatives had 5 tons of thalidomide in American warehouses ready to sell, and they were anxious to have the drug passed. While delaying the approval, Kelsey undertook a literature review, and this again was something new, and she learned there were serious side effects experienced by European thalidomide users, and she further delayed a decision. She also related the symptoms to earlier research she had undertaken at the University of Chicago, where she found quinine to be toxic to fetuses. Merrill underplayed or dismissed Kelsey's concerns, and during the spring and summer of 1961, the company reps came to Washington, she said, in droves. They wrote letters, they telephoned me as often as 3 times a week, they telephoned my superiors, they came to see them too. Most of the things they called me, you wouldn't print. By November, Merrill informed Kelsey that thalidomide was being withdrawn from the German market because of reports of serious congenital abnormalities in children of users. The abnormalities included children born without arms and legs, with their hands and feet growing directly from their torsos. Others were born with cardiac problems. Many more were stillborn. There is an estimated 8,000 to 80,000 thalidomide babies born in Europe. The discrepancy in the numbers was due to many of the defects being internal, which could not be legally traced to consumption of the drug. So the defects is not simply the horrific defects. It included deafness, blindness, stillborn babies, all kinds of other disorders. One of America's leading obstetricians, Dr. Helen Taussig, she was the inventor of the Operation for Blue Babies. She visited Europe shortly after the first thalidomide cases were reported, and when she returned, she delivered speeches warning about the drug and how a similar tragedy had been averted in the United States. Although some reporters understood the magnitude of her findings, there was very little national press for it. At the same time, Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver was trying to revive his bill on drug safety regulations, which would have strengthened the powers of the FDA. This bill had languished in Congress for a lack of interest on the part of both of the houses and on the part of President Kennedy, who had received financial backing from pharmaceutical companies for his campaign. When one of Kefauver's aides read Taussig's speech, he leaked the story to the Washington Post, where the editor, who recognized its potential significance, gave it to a scrappy sports reporter, Morton Mintz, to write up. Mintz's front-page story in the Washington Post hailed Dr. Kelsey as the stubborn scientist who saved the American public, and this was instantly picked up by all of the major newspapers and news services. The Kefauver-Harris bill was unanimously passed by both houses, and Kennedy jumped on the bandwagon by hastily including Dr. Kelsey in the upcoming ceremony for a President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. This snapshot of Dr. Kelsey receiving the medal from President Kennedy also received national as well as international coverage and cemented her position as one of the most famous women of 1962. Frances Kelsey's limelight has been described as perhaps the most intensive and positive experience by any female official in the history of the United States. To the mass public, Kelsey appeared as a cerebral and maternal protector of sorts, quiet, unassuming, brilliant, but circumspect. By 1962, the Gallup poll named her one of the 10 most admired women of the world, behind Jackie Kennedy and Queen Elizabeth II, but ahead of Pat Nixon, Princess Grace of Monaco, Lady Bird Johnson, Helen Hayes, and Betty Davis. Some scholars have speculated whether the public reception would have been the same if another scientist, that is a male one, had been profiled as the gatekeeper against thalidomide in America. I would argue that would not have been as intense or as lasting, and that this was due to Cold War fears and realities. According to polls, fear of the dangers from nuclear energy is far greater among women than men in every country at every time. This was connected with a tendency, when any technology was mentioned, for women to think in terms of safety and their children. Unlike incendiary bombs, tanks, and missiles, nuclear fallout had the power to mutate fetuses and produce serious or fatal birth defects. Unlike radium poisoning, which since the 1920s was identified as potentially deadly to fetuses through unsafe X-ray practices, nuclear fallout could not be avoided. After the 1954 Bravo American fusion test, scientists warned that the fine radioactive dust could cause birth defects in infants born even thousands of miles away. What constituted a radioactive mutant? Popular culture was loaded with examples. The year 1954 brought not only Bravo, but Godzilla, the 400-foot prehistoric reptile that arose from the ashes of Hiroshima to destroy Tokyo. In the same year, Them, another popular film, chronicled the giant killer ants that crawled out of the Nevada desert where American atomic bombs were tested. In an old sense of the word, one historian concluded, a monster was a malformed offspring. If bomb tests violated the natural order, then perhaps it was only to be expected that monstrosities would emerge from the womb of the contaminated earth. Movies did not dare touch the questions of defective babies directly, but since the 1930s, science fiction magazines, less prudish, had run stories about children deformed by radiation. Then on August 19, 1962, 1 month after Morton Mintz broke the story of thalidomide, Dr. Kelsey and the FDA, 12 days after President Kennedy awarded Francis Kelsey the Distinguished Service Medal in a widely publicized ceremony, came this newspaper image. This was the story of Susie Van de Putte of Liège, Belgium, who along with her doctor and mother was charged with murder after the euthanization of her newborn. She had widespread support throughout Belgium, and she was later acquitted. As 3 prominent criminal lawyers summed up, the law of our land does not recognize euthanasia, but the law never foresaw that such dangerous drugs could be placed on the market, causing universal disaster. Less sensational, yet more influential in terms of shaping popular perceptions, was Life magazine's multi-page spread, The Full Story of the Drug Thalidomide, published August 10th. Life's reporters profiled Dr. Kelsey, ran a statement by William S. Merrill, thalidomide's American promoter, who basically said sorry, and published its own heartbreaking photograph of a thalidomide victim. That's the story, that's Dr. Kelsey. Life also profiled Sherry Finkbein, an all-American Arizona mother of 4, Miss Sherry on Phoenix's Romper Room Children's Hour, whose husband had brought back tranquilizers for her from England. Mrs. Finkbein was refused an abortion in Arizona and eventually went to Sweden to end her pregnancy. The fetus was indeed grossly deformed and would not have survived. In the days, weeks, and months following the breaking of the thalidomide tragedy by the American press, letters flooded into Dr. Kelsey's home and office at the FDA. 60 to 70 letters per week, more in the first few weeks, arrived, often addressed simply Dr. Kelsey, Washington, D.C. Like letters to Santa Claus, mail to Dr. Kelsey required no further elaboration for the U.S. Postal Service. In this study, I examined a sample of about 150 letters from the Kelsey collection at the Library of Congress. These letters arrived immediately after the first publicity, that is, between July and August 1962. They came from all over the U.S., mostly from the eastern seaboard, the Midwest, California, and Texas, but as far as Hawaii and the Philippines, Colorado, and North Dakota. The letter writers were mostly women, and most of these women were married. Clearly, Dr. Kelsey's actions struck a chord with American mothers, grandmothers, and potential mothers who wanted to share their feelings with the good scientist. At this point, I really have to emphasize for non-historians how rare collections of fan mail is to find that have survived. There are very little chances for us to judge what the public thinks. And here was an excellent opportunity for me to get a window back about what the public thought of an individual's actions. Letter writing, whether fan mail or complaints, has been a traditional vehicle for interactivity, whether directed to favorite authors, political, religious, or social leaders, or mass media personalities. Fan mail constituted intense emotional experiences which reveal an honesty of emotional interaction rarely found in printed documents. The letter writer also was impelled by the notion that his action is serving some useful or important end. Many of the correspondents attempted to establish an interactive relationship with Dr. Kelsey. Some included home remedies. The author of a novel piano instruction plan, after seeing a picture of Dr. Kelsey's daughter seated around the family piano, sent along his book. Most common, however, were writers who enclosed the newspaper or magazine clipping they had read on her actions. Ralph from Wahpeton, North Dakota, wrote one letter of appreciation once every 5 years. He stated, "The accompanying article in today's paper moves me to praise your restraint, which has likewise served us well." The Denver Post published, "Your conscientious action and discerning judgment was evident," wrote Mrs. George H. of Colorado. Another new mother from Brooklyn, New York, drew Dr. Kelsey's attention to Senator Kefauver's criticism of the revised drug bill, which was also in the paper, and encouraged Dr. Kelsey, "Show Congress how important a strict law in this field would be. I'm hoping you'll be a help with this." In two letters, John from Watertown, Massachusetts, sent along clippings and detailed the publicity he had heard on Dr. Kelsey. "I'm sending along a nice story about you I enjoyed reading. Was watching television yesterday when President Kennedy gave his news conference. Heard him mention you by name twice about your work. Also watched druggist Senator Humphrey gave his views on the same drug. A week or so back, watched your television interview. I'm a keen shortwave radio listener, and I've heard views on the same drug from the BBC London about a debate in the House of Commons and their view." 73-year-old Ryan might have had an ulterior motive behind connecting with the celebrity. Hobbies are shortwave radio and collect used postage stamps. Perhaps he hoped Dr. Kelsey would send along some rare ones from her pile of letters. Others were volunteer archivists. John carefully removed the clippings and mounted them. "Your letters are within the folder, as was attached." "You do not know me," wrote Dorothy of Philadelphia. "I thought perhaps your young daughters might be making a scrapbook for you and would like to have the mastheads from our Philadelphia papers." Many of the correspondents were professionals, business people, or charity administrators who sent their letters on letterhead. Doctors, retired nurses, a TB worker in China, a female phys ed director, and others in the healthcare field cited the magazine articles they read and added their own experiences. Charlotte was a volunteer in the orthopedic section of Illinois Research Hospital and had seen many deformed children, and each one stays in one's memory. William F.G., an insurance broker, wrote, "May I compliment you on your confidence in your training and knowledge and your plain old-fashioned American stick-to-it guns. Stick to your guns. Of course, she's not American, but. One author said, "It is difficult today to imagine or recreate the simultaneous sense of fear of thalidomide, the general worry about the capacity of national institutions to prevent another occurrence of a like disaster, and the widespread admiration for Frances Kelsey. Mothers throughout the nation held Kelsey personally responsible for the good health of their infant children. Many of the letter writers expressed their sense of helplessness to influence their government against the power of giant corporations and how inspired they were by Dr. Kelsey. This is written by one of the mass of little people in this country who feel so utterly defenseless against the drug industry," wrote Herschel D. "I know that the Food and Drug Administration is diligently working for our protection," wrote Mrs. Beverly F. "But I also know that there are times when the best is not good enough. Is there anything that I, as a private citizen, can do to help the administration? Thank you, Dr. Kelsey, for your kindness and understanding of human beings. I'm just a nobody, but wanted you to know how wonderful it is to know there are angels in this money-mad world like you," wrote Bella H. One hears so much these days of the lackness and corruption of public figures that it is certainly heartwarming to know there are dedicated individuals who adhere to their principles in spite of the pressures that are brought upon them, wrote Mrs. Charles of Cleveland, Ohio. "We thank God for creating people like you who fight to protect the citizens of this great country of ours." "Hooray for Dr. Kelsey, hooray for you," crowed Mrs. Dorothy D. Leal of Washington. "If our civilization survives, it will be because of people like you who have integrity and a sense of the value of human life, our best defense against the destructiveness of the purely materialistic. We need more public officials of your valor," wrote V.B. Dinkeldine of Oakland. "Officers possessing your kind integrity, courage, and unbribability by big selfish interest who prize, quote, in big caps, the almighty dollar above everything. More power to you, my good doctor." I want to show you something else. There we go. Clarence Carr, as he then was, he was one of the founders of the history department here with Helen Brown, and he wrote a wonderful book on Canadian novelists Ralph Connor, Lucy Maud Montgomery, and Nellie McClung. And he was working with, he was one of the first to work with fan mail from these people. And in his book, he argued letter writers to early 20th century Canadian novelists lived in a transitional age in which the noble, elevated sentiments of the neoclassical age continued to inform their minds, their emotions, and their spirits. They cherished the values of sacrifice, devotion, order, truth, and beauty. Their intense feelings reflected that nobility. Clarence did not believe this sensibility, as reflected in fan letters, lasted beyond the 1940s. But these values are evident in letters to Dr. Kelsey, where she is lionized and invested with a variety of heroic qualities. One such quality was her ethical fortitude, which was portrayed as a credit for dispassion, neutrality, and objectivity in the pursuit of duty. This was a reversal, or perhaps rehabilitation, of the negative stereotype of the unfeeling male mad scientist who had wrought nuclear and pharmaceutical destruction. Miss Madeline McKee wrote, "You'll probably never make $1 million, but even if you did, I know it would never give you the kind of satisfaction you must have felt when your dedication and determination proved so right." The heroic narrative of maintaining the course against great odds was alluded to in many letters. "Much credit is due you for holding to your beliefs," wrote Joan B. Mrs. Patricia of Hartford wrote shortly, "Creative stubbornness is a quality I rate high." The Dunlops of Hollywood wrote, "Your courage in fighting off these monstrous forces, the drug manufacturers and their cohorts, is it's no longer heard of in our polluted world. We would like to feel that your sterling example of courage, integrity, and concern for human welfare may influence some of your colleagues, who we strongly fear would have and have been swayed by other considerations of a dubious nature. All the blessings upon you, and may we all live to see a world wherein the Francis Kelseys prevail. As one of our commentators, Joe Dolan, said on TV, "You should be canonized. You are a saint." Alice added, "Your name will be remembered with those of other brave heroines like Florence Nightingale, Clarence Barton, and Sister Elizabeth Kenny." Several women displayed a feminism which percolated under the apparent domestic harmony of the Cold War era. I know you can't read them, I'm just showing you some of the pictures. It is with the deepest heartfelt appreciation and respect for honesty built in the fibers of your womanly charm that we take time to write you this message. Surely the Food and Drug Administration can do with more sisters like you. A true sentinel of humanity in Washington, Dr. Kelsey. May God give you many pleasant years as a guidepost to the lame brains and the dead wood and the rubbish that is filling such an organization. To think the most powerful nation on the face of the earth has so many imbeciles drawing such fantastic salaries. She's not finished. There are words known, I am sure, that could describe the lethargy, the stagnation, and the brains without a bounce that filters through the portals of your department and administration. We offer a long, lingering, lovable prayer to an honorable woman. My feeling is we should have more skirts and less dead pants, cluttering up valuable space. This is enough, I know you would say, and we know how happy you are to have that inborn stubbornness, bred no doubt from good pioneering stock. Mrs. John of Yearden, Pennsylvania said, Dear Doctor, my compliments on your vigilance on the public's behalf. We really do need more women in government. No reply necessary. For the first time, I believe some doctors are interested in our health and not the money. I hope this will be a challenge to women in any walk of life to be stubborn about what they know to be wrong. Men are more interested in their job and being a financial success than in being honest, wrote Board Guild, who added, please do not give my name to anyone. Then my favorite, Mrs. Charles of Eddington, Pennsylvania, she wrote a whole 2-page thing here. I'll just read you half of it. They can call you stubborn or anything else they want to, but it shouldn't bother any mother in the USA. Should just make them mad. As far as I'm concerned, you are now in a category with Mrs. Roosevelt, Barbara Fritchie, Helen Keller, and other great ladies. You are the kind of people who make the rest of us proud we are a lady. Those movie star tramps make us feel degraded. I've always felt we needed more women in government and industry and politics, as women have a different viewpoint than men have, especially down-to-earth women, regular, real women. Many men are too commercial, too business. They have lost feeling, are not human anymore. It's all big business with them. Smoke-filled rooms, highballs, what can they get out of it? A lot of people are heartsick and disgusted and discouraged. They try to bring children up right and are hard put to find good examples to point out to them. Then along comes someone like you. Obviously didn't take graft, a clean, good face. Someone who could say no to big business. Well, we can be very thankful for people like you. I feel that this is why our country is truly overrunning with milk and honey, why we haven't been bombed. It is because God has still found 10 good people. So, unlike Sodom and Gomorrah, we are still saved. I am not a man. I'm a 55-year-old grandma. But I can also say on this muggy, rainy day, you are like the sunshine, like a breath of spring. I and all my family thank you from the bottom of our hearts. May God bless you and keep you safe to a good age. And then she had another page postscript, but I won't get into that. She was great. As a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother of lovely children, wrote Mrs. Susan M.O., I wish to thank you for your stamina and integrity. Years ago, when I was fresh out of college, I worked for women's suffrage and have always been a feminist, believing in better opportunities for women. Surely you have vindicated all we have ever done or said in this long battle for women to have a vote and voice in government. I, for one, am most proud of your performance and thank God you were and are at your post. shielding and protecting innocent victims. She added she was a columnist for the Indianapolis News for almost 50 years and still wrote a women's feature column. That religion remained a strong force in early 1960s America was reflected in the generous use of religious imagery, prayers, and citations in the letters. God bless you and all those you hold dear was a common refrain. May God continue to bless and keep you, although you may have already accomplished your life's mission, and may the great physician Jesus continue to walk with you as you go about your daily work, wrote Norma W. What is interesting is that Dr. Kelsey was a scientist first and foremost and did not openly display strong religious beliefs. But this is in no way discouraging for her admirers, Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish. I would argue that this speaks to the very core of religiosity itself, a need to control the uncontrollable and know the unknowable, birth and death. Childbirth is the most natural of processes, how we survive as a species. Yet childbirth remains, even in the most technologically advanced society, unpredictable and mostly uncontrollable. Modern obstetrics can manage risks. It cannot guarantee a totally risk-free experience. It was only during the 1940s, just 2 decades before the thalidomide tragedy, that American women could feel somewhat assured that they would survive childbirth, and infant mortality rates also were falling into a more comfortable zone. But losses of mothers, losses of babies, babies born with defects, all of these were uncomfortably well known to this generation. And this was in relatively normal circumstances. Poverty, warfare, heredity, all were recognized as threats to childbirth, but accustomed, localized, knowable threats. But then add nuclear fallout, contaminants like DDT in drinking water, pharmaceutical poisoning. These were not threats. These were abominations, global in nature, unforeseeable, unavoidable, to mothers who wanted nothing more than to protect and nurture their unborn children. For these mothers and fathers and grandparents, only religious blessings adequately expressed their gratitude to Dr. Kelsey. Thank God that he created you, and thank you for withstanding all pressure concerning thalidomide. God has granted us 2 healthy children, boys aged 2 and 1, and 1 inevitable abortion. His will, not ours. But we do intend to have many more children. If God grants us a deformed child, we'll accept it graciously. We would accept a child deformed from medicine, but would be awfully bitter towards man. To forgive and forget when a person's life is concerned would be nasty medicine for anyone. Thanks again, sincerely, Dick, Eva, Richard, and Aaron. Thank God for people like you to watch over us. I shudder when I think what may have happened if that drug had been let loose among us. I will remember you in my prayers, as so many others must be doing or should be when they realize what you have averted, wrote Teresa, mother of 3. If the women of the U.S. should select a champion, wrote Mrs. Edith of Lexington, South Carolina, it should be you. I am almost 9 months pregnant, and ever since I first read about the thalidomide in Newsweek magazine, I have thanked God that I have not taken any. If it weren't for you and others that safeguard our health, I more than likely would have taken this drug. Thank God for people like you that have the courage of their convictions and stick to them as you do. May God always walk with you, wrote Hattie of Arlington Heights. I write this letter from a grateful heart because I have 3 grandsons and another one on the way. And what a horrible thought that through no fault of my daughters, they could give birth to babies with such deformities. Dr. Kelsey, why did the companies put all the drugs on the market before they have been really tested for a long time and not use people for their experiments to the sorrow of all concerned and for generations to come? Surely the use of drugs and chemicals in food is doing us so much harm. The preservatives that they use in food is causing damage that can never be remedied. Surely the people of the United States, taxpayers, are entitled to this protection. Is this department for the protection of the public, or is it for the use of the chemical companies? One mother for Arlington, Texas wrote, "In June of last year, 1961, I was taking tranquilizer pills. I was then in the 3rd month of my pregnancy. In January, I gave birth to a perfectly normal baby girl, our first child. As I watch her learn to creep, pull her feet in her mouth, and otherwise use her arms and legs, I am increasingly gratified to you. As long as you and people like you work in Food and Drug Administration, we of the American public can accept with confidence the medicines our doctors prescribe." This is one of the standard letters. She wrote back to everyone that through her office she had one secretary, otherwise she did it pretty well all herself. She wrote back everyone. They often would ask her medical advice and she'd give a little bit and then tell them they have to go to their doctors. But she was pretty diligent about it. Now, what did Dr. Kelsey have to say in the midst of this intense, often florid rhetoric about technological experimentation and defective babies? As the public face of the FDA, she gave speeches to dozens of audiences, ranging from the scientific to the governmental to the public, most often to women's clubs. She gave the same speech many times, one of which was safety of drugs during pregnancy. In every instance, her tone and language was measured, scientific, and objective. That is, the voice of the good scientist. When drugs are administered during pregnancy, she began, 2 evaluations must be reached, that involving the safety to the mother and that involving the safety to the unborn child. Until comparatively recently, it was felt the placenta served as a protective barrier, preventing exposure of the embryo to drugs and other compounds consumed by the mother during pregnancy. We now know that the so-called placental barrier permits virtually all such substances to pass from the mother's bloodstream to that of the developing child. We also know substances need not cross the placental barrier to have an effect on the fetus, but may exert an indirect effect by interfering with the metabolic processes of the mother. Dr. Kelsey goes on to describe the effects of drugs on the fetus, again without the impassioned language of her public supporters. Drugs given very early in pregnancy may result in death of the embryo and subsequent abortion, which may or may not be recognized. Drugs given during the period of the rapid development of the organ systems of the embryo, if the drug is not sufficiently toxic to cause death, may give rise to distortions of growth which resulted in birth deformities. Dr. Kelsey concluded her talk by supporting the judicious use of drugs even during pregnancy. There are obviously many times during pregnancy when the withholding of a drug would have much more serious consequences than the possible risk of adverse effects to either the mother or the child. And it would indeed be unfortunate if fear of adverse reaction to the offspring led to the withholding of a drug that might be essential to the mother's well-being. This was hardly the rhetoric of the avenging maternal angel, an image with which many of Dr. Kelsey's early fans wanted to cloak her. Even the enthusiastic journalists who painted her with the wide brush of the heroic crusader, once they actually met her and conversed with her, had to temper their descriptive phrases. The stubborn, careful scientist was rewarded with a promotion in 1963 to the chief of the new investigative drug branch of the FDA Division of New Drugs. The consummate bureaucrat, she successfully negotiated herself and her department through a series of Democratic and Republican administrations and FDA restructurings. She said that during the Reagan years, basically her office was in a closet. He didn't really believe in the FDA. Until her retirement in 2005, after 45 years, at the age of 90. She lived in her own home in Chevy Chase, Maryland, until she was 100, when she moved into her daughter's home in London, Ontario. When she was 101, she finally received the Order of Canada, and I'm proud to say I was one of the nominators. Because she was too frail to attend the ceremony in Ottawa, the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario brought the medal to her. The night she received it, she went to sleep and passed on. As her daughter said, she lived classy and died classy. All in all, a worthy apostle and arbiter of good science. Thank you.